Welcome back, everyone, to the latest episode of the CyberSec Sessions. Today, I'm joined by Chrisi Baetz, former CISO at Etrading Software. Thank you very much for your time today, Chrisi.
Thank you for having me, James.
Well, welcome. So to start off for the audience, could you give a bit of an overview of your career in cybersecurity up to this point?
So I've been in cybersecurity for 16 years, been working in regulated and non-regulated industries, so from financial services to utilities and chemicals. Started as an IT auditor with one of the big four, and then moved to internal audit, and then it was a natural progression to move to first line of defense. And for the past bit more than 5 years, I've been a CISO, and during that time, I developed many multi-year cybersecurity strategies and roadmaps, which I implemented, and ultimately it was all about transformational change. And I've had opportunities, both greenfield and brownfield, where I was able to build and lead teams across the world, different cultures, different backgrounds. So in Europe, in the States, Middle East, and in Asia, which was really, really interesting. And also successfully navigated through a few cyber attacks as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for that overview. And from your experience in the past, you mentioned some experience with business continuity and the importance of that. So what things do you think that a business may overlook, or what advice can you give around business continuity?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it's really important to have a business continuity plan in the first place. But there are quite a few things that people maybe only slightly touch upon. Others are really, really good. But I often find that when it comes to protecting your backups, that isn't always fully looked into, but also thinking about your actual continuity processes. So what are your alternative options that you got if your system is down? And you've got so many third-party vendors. So what's your dependency on them? And also your internal communication. So there are kind of 4 key elements for me that where I can see often that people touch base on them, but they don't really drill into the necessary level of detail that is actually required to really think about your business continuity end to end, and also to avoid any surprises when you're actually faced with a scenario where you have to invoke your business continuity plan. Now, I mentioned backup protection, and if you think about a ransomware attack, a threat actor comes in, encrypts your data. Then what do? Your next option is you use your backups to restore and go back to your normal business operations. But what happens if the attacker is also able to access those backups and encrypt them? Then actually that option is no longer valid. So what do? So either you rebuild the system from scratch, which can take ages and not really recommended. But again, there might be some options where it is possible and doesn't take too long, especially with being in the cloud. But or the last option is to pay for the ransom demand, which obviously isn't. You don't want to be in that option, and it's not recommended. And so what can you do? When we talk about protection, I often hear offline backups, but there isn't really a clear definition. What does offline mean? And ultimately, you need to make sure that your backups are air-gapped, i.e. they are isolated from your network, so that the attacker can't laterally move to access those backups. But also another option is to have immutable backups, meaning you can't alter them, and therefore you can't encrypt those backups. So really, really key. And it is important to understand your critical systems and really making sure that you do have those offline or mutable backups in place across all of them. And it doesn't matter whether you're on-prem or in the cloud.
Yeah, great thing to think about. Definitely heard people talking about, cool, we've got backups, we're fine, but actually that step deeper on what you're going to do if it's compromised.
and touch base on your alternative business processes. And because people then think, oh, our system is it will never be unavailable, will never be down. But actually, it can. So what do you really do? And especially if your processes are built around your technology, then you really need to have the end-to-end understanding that you need to document. You need to understand who's involved, what are the dependencies across various teams, across other systems as well, input, output, and also thinking about the time of if you were under a ransomware attack or any other reason why a system might be unavailable. For example, you're just using a payroll system. Well, if that is down at the time of the month when you actually have your payroll run, I don't think anyone would be happy because no one would get paid. But then if the system was down, then especially during the payroll run, like you need to have alternative options. Do you go back to pen and paper? So you really still need to make sure that you've got that covered, so you're still able to pay your employees. So really, really important to think about the timing, the criticality, the dependency, and that end-to-end process. Really, really important.
Fantastic. Yeah. Awesome point.
And just to touch base on the third parties, first of all, you need to be clear. You need to understand who they are. What do they do? What role do they play as part of your critical business processes? And what level of access do they actually have? And especially with what we've seen earlier in the year with the CrowdStrike incident, and really be clear on the roles and responsibilities, and don't just assume it's a third vendor who's doing a certain activity, because that could be a downfall, especially if they don't do it, and ultimately that means no one is looking into it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people got a bit of a wake-up call there. It's worth checking everything now, isn't it? Makes sense. Right.
And last but not least, when we're talking about communication, especially if your internal communication channels are down, so you can't send or receive emails, you can't use Teams or Zoom or whatever solution you use, then how do you actually get hold of the right people? How do you, and especially if you're under a cyber attack and you have to invoke your business continuity plan, how do you inform all employees as to what's going on, what has happened, what they should and shouldn't be doing? So it is important to think about that upfront. Make sure you do have those alternative communication channels available, and also test them.
It's true. Yeah, I'm just thinking through my current job. I'm like, don't know if I've got all the people's phone numbers even that I need to do it.
And of course, you always have a few numbers, but especially if you have a bigger organization, you don't.
You have to do like an old school phone tree or something where everyone calls it. It's just be but you've got to have some kind of plan in place on how you'd organize that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And you touched on ransomware a little bit there, and you mentioned before that you've had encounters with ransomware in the past, or put it that way. So what advice can you give about communicating specifically with the C-suite about how to handle things when that happens?
Yeah, I think key is to be prepared. So educate C-suite and the board on ransomware, especially on ransomware payments, because you don't want to be talking about ransom payments under pressure if you're actually under a ransomware attack, because that's the worst timing that could happen. So really want to educate that and have a debate with leadership team up front, where you align on the strategy whether to pay or not. I mean, ultimately you shouldn't be paying, because that would only enable the industry, because it is an industry basically, and the more companies that pay, then of course that is going to continue to for threat actors to attack. But at the same time, this is not clear cut, and it's you really need to think about the actual scenario, and where you might be faced with a situation where you can't actually restore your systems, and you can't rebuild them because it would take too long. And if you don't pay, there is a high risk that your operations would cease. Yeah, and obviously, what do? Do you pay, or do you go out of business? Yeah, and if thinking about it, then it's you need to put your business and your customers and your employees first as well. Yeah, because you do have a responsibility. And but if you were to decide to pay, and again, first recommendation is not to. Yeah, just want to reiterate that. And it is thinking about what your thinking up front, what your critical systems are, and like what are your crown jewels? What is really, really important to you, and what would actually hurt if it was down? If it was something that actually isn't that important, isn't that critical to your operations, if that system was encrypted, do you know what? If that was down for a little bit longer, it wouldn't really affect you, so you wouldn't actually pay. Yeah, but if it was really, really critical, so then you would have those discussions. And but if you were to pay, and the threat actor was on a sanctioned list, then you need to think about the sanctions regime, because engaging with someone like an individual or a group or a nation state who is on the sanctions list, that is illegal, and it could lead to fines, like up in the UK up to 1 million, or even imprisonment of 7 years. Yeah, and I think that's important to be mindful of. And well, I wouldn't want to go to prison. I mean, who wants to? Yeah, so it is having that education up front to really be aware of those implications.
It's very true, yeah. And thought of some of those elements, which definitely means that some of the board won't. So yeah, getting them on board as soon as you can, and getting them to understand those risks and those elements makes sense. And actually, when one of the previous episodes, for anyone that's listening, I was talking to John Staniforth, and he was CISO at the time, the Royal Mail ransomware attacks. When they encrypted things there and locked everything down, it was just on a small section of their international shipping, which is why they ultimately decided, look, we can rebuild things, we can go from there and bring it back. Yeah, it's a different case when it's, as you say, in the crown jewel, right at the heart of what you're doing versus the edge. So defining that makes sense.
And even if you decide to pay, there's actually no guarantee that, first of all, you get the encryption key, the decryption key back. But at the same time, you probably still get it, because it is an industry after all. But if you have the decryption key, if there is a bug in the actual ransomware malware, then even with the right key, you might not be able to decrypt, and or there might be some backdoors, some hidden malware. But there's always a risk, and I think that there are ways, like what you can do, like upfront, in terms of your thought process. And talked about the critical systems, but it is actually important to put a bit of a value, a dollar sign or a pound sign next to it. So what is your, I think you need to calculate what that system downtime cost on a daily basis, and what does it cost for your, if your employees aren't able to work, what's the impact on your customers? Yeah, and if you then have those thresholds, so to speak, that information available, and thinking about any other additional mitigating factors you have. So we talked about those offline backups, yeah, but also is the system internal facing or external? So internet facing, then you obviously have higher risk with it. So thinking about those scenarios and giving some guidance to the board, where you say, okay, if it's above or below or within a certain threshold, then don't pay for the ransomware ransom demand, or investigate, because you can't just say here you pay or here you don't. But it is important to have that guidance and to make the board and leadership, the leadership team think, and ultimately what was best for the business. Yeah, and to have that discussion up front, and then if you're then in a situation where you're actually under ransomware attack, then you can use that guidance. Yeah, and because you've gone through that thought process, it's not like completely new, and it's going to be a high pressure scenario anyway, so you want to make the right decision. Yeah, and I think last but not least, we're talking about those figures, also thinking about how can your cyber insurance play a role as well. If you have one, of course, then you need to think about your coverage, or your insurance coverage, and also cyber insurance also helps you to, or provides you with a negotiator, so to negotiate the ransom demand. But also they tend to have Bitcoin accounts, because which company actually has a Bitcoin account themselves? I mean, hardly anyone. And especially if you have to pay high sums within 24, 48 hours, that is not going to be approved through the normal payment channels with your bank. Yeah, because of anti-money laundering. So you need someone to help you, and the negotiator can help you. But at the same time, the cyber insurance document itself and the your guidelines on those thresholds we discussed, you need to make sure that they are encrypted, because if an attacker is able to access that information, then you basically lose all your negotiating power, because they know exactly what to ask for.
Fantastic. That's some really great advice there. Thanks for running through that. So a question I always ask everyone on the podcast, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think the biggest threat in cybersecurity is at the moment?
Apart from the geopolitical situation, you still have ransomware. That is going to be the key one. Yeah, it's not. I don't think there's anything new. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Absolutely, and we've talked through some of those there. Yeah, some of the things you don't think about with ransomware, so it absolutely makes sense how damaging it can be.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Finally, then, the last question I always ask is what advice can you give to teams looking to attract and then retain cyber talent at the moment?
That's a good question. I think first of all, you need to be clear on your target operating model. So how do you actually want to structure your own team? Yeah, and how does that align with the business as well, so that you can deliver not only your cyber security objectives, but again, that needs to meet business objectives. And if you have that view, it will then help you to articulate to finding new talent as to, okay, this is what we're about. This is what we're about. This is what the organization does. This is how we are structured, and these are the opportunities. And but at the same time, that also helps once you've got your talent available in your team, having a clear roadmap, a career roadmap that outlines the skills and what are soft skills and technical skills required for each individual role. So whether it is junior, mid, or more senior. And if you are able to clearly articulate, then it gives everyone clarity and also visibility. And outside of that, you can always kind of like create new roles if obviously the business allows it to. And sometimes creating new roles doesn't have to be that something completely different. You might make a few more tweaks, and that helps your existing team or the particular team members to grow as well into that new role. So you give them those opportunities. So I think that's really, really important.
Fantastic. Yeah, I totally agree. People, especially more, I'd say the last few years, people want to know when they join a company where they can go, how they get to where they're going to go, and yeah, by mapping that all out very carefully, it definitely helps things. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time here today, Chrisi. That wraps up all the questions we've had. But I've really enjoyed it, and I think there's some great bits of advice for people to implement themselves, or at least have a think about.
Yeah, thank you so much, James, for having me. Really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Fantastic. That went really well.
Good.
So we'll do on there.